The Shieldmaidens decided to go back the same way they came, thinking the cliffs would give them some protection. They gazed out at the Black Keep in silence, both pondering how such a place could even exist. The recipe for Thor was a valuable prize, and it held their future in its words. "We must really think about finding a place to camp for the night," Astrid said, breaking the silence. "Yes, it will be night soon," Elsa replied. They were no strangers to camping in the winter cold under the stars, and this would be no different. "Let's see if we can find a place in the cliffs to protect us from the winds," Elsa said, sounding exhausted. Astrid nodded as she looked up at the sky. She noticed that it was beginning to snow. She had no more turn to leave when she saw it. "Look, Elsa!" It was as if the gods were smiling down on them. Why did they not see this before? As they approached, they could see it was a broken-down, deserted cabin, and certainly no one lived there now. "Let's see what we have, Elsa." And as they stepped inside, they were pleased. It certainly was not perfect, but it would do nicely. As they looked around the cabin, they were glad to see a fireplace and a cot. The walls and roof had suffered some damage, with gaping holes, but it was still better than sleeping out in the cold with just a campfire. Finding meager food in the crate and a jug of water, they started a fire to keep warm. As tired as they were also excited about the future. They talked long into the night about what they should do next. They both agreed that they wanted to live here in the snows. It is what they knew and felt far more at home. They would go as far north as their armor would allow them and find a place to settle. Astrid was sure Elsa would be in a hurry to get back to Thor. She was not. She was committed totally to their new life in these lands, and for now, Thor did not seem to be a part of it. They finally gave in to their heavy eyelids and settled in for the night. The snows had died down, and they were lucky that the winds did also. They slept well and did not rise early. Their dreams had been filled with the promise of finding the perfect spot for their new home. After eating a small meal, they stepped outside to greet the day. "I think we should head back to the river, but head north from there," Elsa said. "The further into the snows, the better." "Well, when we first climbed this cliff, I noticed what looked like a pass in the mountains," Astrid replied. "Let's find that." They headed out in anticipation, keeping a steady pace until they reached the pass. "That looks like it there," Astrid said, as she looked around. "And that's the river behind us," Elsa replied. "So that's the right direction. Let's go see what we can find." Looking out before them, they both spotted the same place. It was a high plateau and looked to be on a cliff. From there, it appeared to be rather large. They rushed forward to get a better look. Once there, it indeed looked like the perfect spot. And see, Elsa, there's a road down there. I hope there's a way on top, she yelled as she headed towards it. There looked to be a path to her right that would take them to the top of the plateau. It was perfect, with cliffs all around. This was the only entrance to the plateau. It could not be better for defense. Elsa ran on ahead. Astrid, it's perfect. I can see our new home already, she exclaimed. Astrid had to admit it was a beautiful spot. She walked further onto the plateau, envisioning their new home. This is where their longhouse would sit. And as she slowly reached the cliff's edge, she could envision homes down below. They would build a large clan, but first things first. They had to claim the land. I've not seen a single clan here, Elsa, so let's claim this now. So they built a large bonfire and placed small cairns around it as markers, signifying their ownership. This was home. I'm not sure where this road leads, Elsa, so I think we should go back the same way we came, through the pass, and find the river. From there, we can follow it back to Sepermeru. The river is just down there, but I also see some ruins, Astrid said. I don't see anyone around though, Elsa. It looks like it was a large circular build at one time, Elsa said. Probably Sumerian. We'd better be careful. Well, there is a bear, Elsa, but it looks like he's headed back into the woods. The Shieldmaidens decided to stick close to the river as they followed it down, crossing when needed. The further down they went, they encountered wolves, but they proved to be no problem for them. They knew they were close now, as the ward towers came into view. "Here we are," Astrid shouted. "The path to Sepermeru." They couldn't wait to greet Thor with the news. Thor's prayers were answered. The Shieldmaidens had returned after many weeks of agonizing waiting. He was so pleased to see Elsa was back safe and sound, but crossed his arms in anger and disbelief when he heard their tale. Elsa had broken her promise and entered the Black Keep, and he was sure it was at Astrid's coaxing. They told him of the undead henchmen, the floor traps, and the ghost of the poor young woman. They spoke of long corridors, an ancient key, and dead ends. It was then that Astrid began to recount Elsa's bravery when they encountered the Kinscourge. She could see Thor's anger just below the surface, and continued on. They spoke about how they had dodged his magic and fast lunges. Astrid exclaimed that his sword was as long as she was tall, but in the end, he was no match for them. Finally, they told him with pride and joy in their voices that they indeed had the recipe he sought. It was not a rumor, but did exist. Only they were the only ones who could retell it. Thor was now in total shock and disbelief. He had the recipe for armor that would see any warrior through any climate and any battle. His mind raced ahead about what this would mean to him and to them. He was more concerned now than ever about their safety. "You must not speak a word of this recipe to anyone," Thor advised. "If anyone has overheard you now, it could put you in great danger. I suggest we meet later at the cliffs just beyond the smelter to talk about this. It's a well-protected area, and no one will hear us there." The Shieldmaidens agreed, and Elsa could sense that some of Thor's anger had abated. They had not considered the danger it would mean if anyone knew of their knowledge. All they could think of was the ability to travel to the far north, the lands of Ymir. Thor sat at the water's edge, trying to digest all he had just learned. He was experiencing more emotions at one time than he had ever had in his entire life. If he didn't know better, he was sure he was in love with Elsa. But after hearing of her exploits, he was almost sure he was not worthy of her. She was by far the most fearsome and admirable woman he had ever met. The fact that she would endanger her life just to bring him his future was beyond all comprehension. The implications of having this new armor knowledge would make him a most sought-after armorer, to be sure. But having the armor herself would take her far away from him. There was much to think about, and he must get ready to meet them. They all met at the appointed place, and Thor began. "Are you ready to give the recipe?" he asked. Elsa and Astrid entered an almost meditative state as they relayed the recipe to Thor. It was more complicated and lengthy a process than he had imagined. How they could remember such a process word for word, he did not know. Surely it was some kind of sorcery that only the Kinscourge could obtain. When they had finally finished, Astrid further commented to Thor that they had no idea what any of this meant, so it was of no use to them. They would, however, write it all down for him later. "Most of these materials I could obtain, but the star metal is only thought to be a myth," Thor said. "It is said to fall from the heavens and can only be harvested by the finest pickaxes. The Cimmerians are thought to have used it for centuries, but it is a closely guarded secret." "We came across some ruins of a Cimmerian hut on our journey to find a new home," Astrid said. "New home?" Thor asked, truly surprised by this revelation. "Yes, Thor, we've claimed land in the north and plan to start building there soon," Elsa replied. Thor's heart sank. "I see," he said. Astrid quickly added that they could search out the star metal for him. Surely it was no myth if the Cimmerians used it, and it was in the recipe. "The black ice is no myth, but it is rare to find and hard to get," Thor said. "It is usually found north of the Cimmerian camps, high in the mountains." "Consider it done," Astrid said with a smile. "How hard could it be?" They fell silent, each in their own thoughts, as the smoke from the campfire billowed into the night sky. What were they plotting? The rumors were already spreading throughout Sepermeru. Someone overheard the Shieldmaidens telling Thor they had conquered the Black Keep and the Kinscourge. This was grave news indeed. It meant that they were surely too powerful and too protected by the gods to take by force. This would require more cunning and planning than he first thought.